The public is being conditioned to watch for incoming missiles. This is a strategic misdirection. The carrier strike group, the B-21, the hypersonic launch, these are symbols of a previous paradigm. The kinetic cost of a peer-on-peer conflict is no longer the primary calculation. The first strike of the next war will not be a launch detection. It will be silence. The true vector of attack is the global central nervous system, the 1.3 million kilometers of subsea fiber optic cable that carry 99% of all intercontinental data traffic, including trillions in financial transactions. RUSI documents confirm these assets are catastrophically vulnerable. The same market forces driving the proliferation of low-cost electronic warfare drones are now being applied to autonomous undersea systems. A coordinated severing of these data arteries, combined with a satellite blinding campaign, does not target the military directly. It targets the core liability of the West, its hyper-leveraged financial system. A BOFA survey confirms global investors are in a state of hyper-bull euphoria, with protective hedging having collapsed. The system has no brakes. A global data blackout is a mathematical accelerant for an instantaneous systemic solvency crisis. This creates the blind Leviathan, a superpower still possessing unmatched kinetic force, but its eyes have been gouged out and its brainstem severed from its limbs. It cannot verify targets, coordinate logistics, or stabilize its own markets. Internally, the pre-existing affordability crisis, as documented by reports on 2025 consumer changes, detonates into mass civil unrest when digital payment systems fail. The state is rendered insolvent and internally besieged, all without a single missile being fired. The pivot to asymmetric escalation is not a strategy of choice. It is a mathematical certainty born from a national solvency crisis. When a state can no longer afford the kinetic cost of a conventional war, the conflict itself becomes the primary domestic liability, forcing a desperate search for cheaper vectors of attack. This is not theoretical. CSIS analysis of the Russian war effort frames the entire operation as a high-stakes bet on national solvency. As sanctions and attrition decimated the budget, the war morphed from a foreign policy objective into an unpopular, nation-breaking financial liability. This is the trigger condition. Weakness forces the pivot. The calculus shifts from "how do we defeat their army" to "what is the cheapest weapon that creates the most expensive problem for our adversary?" This logic is the direct accelerant behind the market explosion in low-cost electronic warfare drones. These are not weapons for defeating a carrier group. They are weapons for bankrupting a treasury. The objective is to force a launch-on-warning protocol, not for nuclear arms, but for fiscal liquidity. By deploying thousands of cheap threats, the adversary compels the superpower to expend billions on high-cost defensive systems, weaponizing the superpower's own superior technology against its balance sheet. The motive, therefore, is not conquest. It is induced self-destruction, an actor facing internal collapse due to the cost of its own war pivots. Their goal, to detonate the adversary's pre-existing liabilities, like the affordability crisis crippling its population, and force a zero-sum choice between strategic escalation or systemic solvency failure. The entire protocol of asymmetric escalation is fueled by a brutal economic inversion. A new report from RUSI frames the kinetic cost exchange with mathematical certainty. On one side, a $5 million main battle tank, a marvel of industrial-era power. On the other, a $500 first-person view drone, often assembled from commercially available parts. This is a 10,000 to 1 cost disparity. The adversary is not attempting to build a better tank. They are executing a strategy to bankrupt the entity that does. Each successful strike is not a tactical victory. It is an act of asset liquidation against a superpower's balance sheet. The objective is to make defense economically unsustainable, forcing a solvency crisis long before a military defeat. This economic leverage is enabled by what strategists at CSIS call the democratization of violence. Lethal, precision strike capability is no longer the exclusive domain of nation-states. It has become a commodity. The proliferation of low-cost drone technology, as documented by reports on the electronic warfare market, means the barrier to entry for projecting force has collapsed. Any non-state actor can now access a kinetic capability that was once reserved for a superpower's military-industrial complex. The blueprint for asymmetric escalation is not theoretical. It is being actively field-tested in global gray zones, regions selected for their pre-existing instability to serve as proxy laboratories. CSIS reports identify these zones as the staging grounds where the kinetic cost of tactical experimentation is effectively zero. Here, adversaries refine the tactical application of low-cost, high-impact systems. The proliferation of cheap electronic warfare drones, confirmed by industry analysis, is the primary vector. The objective is not to occupy territory. It is to gather data. They are calculating the precise pressure required to detonate a society already hollowed out by internal liabilities, like a systemic affordability crisis. These controlled experiments perfect the playbook for deployment in primary flashpoints, such as the Taiwan Strait, against a target whose financial system has abandoned all hedging protocols. The most dangerous protocol in modern warfare is not a weapon. It is a decision-making algorithm. Authorities at CSIS and RUSI define it as launch on warning. The doctrine mandates the retaliatory launch of a nuclear arsenal upon detection of an inbound missile swarm, before those missiles arrive. The decision window is not days or hours. It is minutes. This protocol is the ultimate systemic liability. The new blueprint for asymmetric warfare does not target the missiles. It targets the decision. The Vector is not a hypersonic weapon. It is a low-cost electronic warfare drone, a market now seeing significant corporate investment. Its function is not kinetic destruction, but strategic paralysis. When that drone swarm executes a coordinated cyber attack, it blinds the early warning network. Radars go dark. Satellites show ghosts. This creates the fog of digital war, an information vacuum where data is untrustworthy and time is zero. In that vacuum, the commander is forced to launch not on confirmation, but on fear. The calculation becomes a zero-sum game. Option A. Do not launch and risk a decapitating first strike that the nation's fragile social and financial systems cannot possibly absorb, given the pre-existing affordability crisis and a market where, as Buffet noted, hedging has collapsed. Option B. Launch and initiate global strategic escalation based on what could be a digital ghost. The adversary forces the choice, making the superpower detonate its own solvency. This is the nuclear dilemma in an age of asymmetric escalation. The protocol for systemic warfare has been rewritten. The adversary understands that a superpower's actual center of gravity is not its carrier groups, but its solvency. The proliferation of low-cost electronic warfare platforms, confirmed by open-source intelligence, provides the asymmetric vector. The objective is not military defeat. It is to trigger a cascading liability crisis within a financial system where, according to Bank of America, hedging has collapsed and investors are at a state of hyper-bull euphoria. This new blueprint requires a test, a calibration shot, to measure the system's fragility and response time. The purpose is not destruction, but data collection. An adversary needs to quantify the latency between a disruptive event and a liquidity panic. CSIS analysis confirms that critical infrastructure nodes are the primary targets for such non-kinetic probes. The kinetic cost is near zero. The intelligence value is incalculable. Therefore, the calibration event within the next 12 months will be an attribution impossible electronic blackout of a critical Pacific shipping port, likely one integral to the Japan-US logistics chain mentioned in post-war diplomatic analysis. A swarm of low-cost EW drones will simultaneously jam GPS, crane communications, and logistics software for 48 to 72 hours, creating a ghost fleet scenario. The event will be publicly framed as a catastrophic system failure, but it is a deliberate probe to measure the shockwave through a market stripped of its hedges and a populace already stressed by an affordability crisis. It is the final systems check before launch.